Have you ever had a night where your heart just wouldn't rest? Where you lay in bed staring at the ceiling wondering, God, are you trying to tell me something? Maybe it came after a heartbreak. Maybe it came after you lost a job, or even when everything seemed fine on the outside, but inside something whispered, there's more. You're not finished yet. This moment, this feeling, isn't random. It's not just your imagination. It's God tugging at the strings of your soul. And tonight, His message for you is going to shift everything you thought you knew about your journey. But here's the question, are you truly ready to hear it? Before I go deeper, make sure you like this video, subscribe to LWN, and hit the bell icon so you never miss these life-changing messages. And if your spirit is awake right now, drop this in the comments, I'm ready, Lord. Because sometimes writing it down is a step of faith, a declaration that you're open to what God wants to reveal. Now, let me take you into a story. A man once built his life around control. Every detail was calculated, his job, his savings, his friendships. He thought if he could just manage everything, nothing would surprise him. But then one night, a single phone call shattered his world. A diagnosis he didn't expect. Suddenly, all his plans, all his control slipped through his fingers like sand. That night he cried out, God, what now? What do you want from me? And here's the twist. God didn't answer with a solution. He answered with silence. But in that silence, the man felt something shift. For the first time, he realized life wasn't about control. It was about surrender. C.S. Lewis once wrote, pain insists upon being attended to. God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. Could it be that the very thing breaking you right now is the megaphone God is using to wake you up? Think of Job, a man who lost everything, his children, his wealth, his health. Yet in his brokenness, Job didn't curse God. Instead, he said, though he slay me, yet will I hope in him. Job 13:15. That kind of faith doesn't come from comfort. It comes when you finally realize God's hand is bigger than the storm. So here's the anticipation building inside your spirit tonight. What if the silence you're facing is not God ignoring you, but God preparing you? What if the unanswered prayer is the space where He's rewriting your story? Let me tell you another truth. Jesus Himself faced nights like this. Remember Gethsemane, the garden where He prayed, Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done. Luke 22:42. That was the moment of ultimate surrender. Jesus wasn't spared from the trial, but through the trial came resurrection, victory, and the salvation of the world. So the question for you tonight is this. If Jesus had to surrender before His greatest breakthrough, are you willing to surrender before yours? I want you to really think about this, because it might be the dividing line in your life right now. God doesn't just want to bless you with answers. He wants to transform you with His presence. And transformation only begins when we say, not my will, but yours. C.S. Lewis also said something powerful. There are far, far better things ahead than any we leave behind. But here's the challenge. You can't step into better things while holding on to old fears, old habits, or old ways of thinking. Something has to shift. And tonight, that shift begins in you. But here's where the anticipation grows. Because you might be asking, how do I know if I'm truly ready? How do I know if this is the moment where everything changes? Stay with me, because the answer is not what you think. And once you see it, you'll understand why God has been preparing your heart all along. If you've ever felt like you're standing on the edge of something new, type this in the comments right now. I trust you, God. Declare it as your prayer of surrender tonight. Because in just a moment, I'm going to show you the exact sign that proves you're ready for God's shift, the very evidence that heaven has been waiting for you to see. So what is the sign that proves you're ready for God's shift? It's not a feeling of excitement. It's not when all the pieces fall into place, and it's certainly not when life suddenly becomes easy. No, being ready for God's message begins the moment you recognize your weakness and surrender it into His hands. Think about Paul. The great apostle who wrote nearly half the New Testament didn't say, "When I am strong, then God uses me." Instead, he declared, "When I am weak, then I am strong." 2 Corinthians 12:10. Why? Because it was in his weakness that Christ's power was revealed. And maybe that's exactly what you've been missing. You thought being ready meant having your life in order, your prayers perfectly spoken, your faith rock solid. But in reality, God moves most powerfully when you whisper through trembling lips, "Lord, I can't do this alone." Let me tell you a story. A young woman had been praying for years for a breakthrough in her marriage. Every night she begged God to change her husband, to fix the anger, to heal the distance. But nothing seemed to happen. Until one night, broken and exhausted, she prayed differently. She whispered, "God, change me. Teach me to love like you love." That very prayer was the turning point. Slowly, peace filled her heart. Not because her situation immediately changed, but because she finally understood God's shift begins inside of us before it ever shows up around us. And over time, her marriage did heal, not because God granted her demand, but because He transformed her into the vessel of love her husband desperately needed. C.S. Lewis captured this perfectly when he said, "There are two kinds of people, those who say to God, 'Thy will be done,' and those to whom God says, in the end, 'Thy will be done.'" Which one are you tonight? Are you ready to say, "Thy will be done," even if it leads you down a road you didn't plan? This is where anticipation builds even stronger, because here's the twist most Christians overlook. God's shift often feels like loss before it looks like gain. Joseph was betrayed by his brothers, thrown into a pit, and sold as a slave. From the outside, his life was falling apart. But what he didn't know was that every painful step was preparing him for the palace. He had to lose his freedom in order to gain his destiny. And when he finally stood as second in command of Egypt, he could say to the very men who betrayed him, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." Genesis 50:20. Do you see it? That's the sign. When you stop resisting the pit and start trusting God's hand, you're ready. When you can look at the storm and say, "Even here I will trust you," then heaven is already shifting things in your favor. But let me ask you this. What pit are you in right now? Is it financial struggle? Is it loneliness? Is it the silent battle with temptation or fear? Whatever it is, that pit might not be punishment. It might be preparation. And here's the next anticipation-building truth. The very place of your breaking is often the birthplace of your calling. Moses was broken in the desert for 40 years before God used him to deliver Israel. David was hunted like an animal before he ever wore a crown. Even Peter, who denied Jesus 3 times, was the one God chose to preach the first sermon at Pentecost, bringing thousands to salvation. So if you feel unworthy, if you feel broken, if you feel like you've messed up too many times to count, congratulations. You're exactly the kind of person God uses when He wants to shift history. Now, I want to pause and ask you to take a step of faith with me. If you know you're in a pit right now, but you believe God can turn it for good, write this in the comments. God is shifting my story. Let that be your amen. The declaration tonight, not just words, but an act of trust. And remember, Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven, Matthew 5:3. Do you realize what that means? It means the moment you realize your spiritual poverty, your emptiness, your weakness, that's the very moment the doors of heaven swing wide open. This is why tonight's message matters so much, because God isn't just waiting to hand you blessings. He's waiting for you to open your hands, release control, and let Him pour His will into your life. But let me push this even deeper, because there's one more layer we need to uncover, one more twist that changes everything. If the pit is preparation, then what is the purpose of the silence? Why does God sometimes seem so quiet when you're desperate for an answer? Stay with me, because this may be the most powerful revelation of all. So why does God stay silent in the very moments we cry the loudest? Why, when your heart feels like it's shattering, does heaven seem so still? Here's the truth that so many miss. God's silence is not His absence. His silence is often His strategy. Think about it. A teacher doesn't talk during the test. The silence isn't neglect. It's proof that the teacher trusts you to apply what you've already been taught. Could it be that heaven's silence in your life right now is God saying, I've prepared you for this moment. I'm right here, but I need you to step out in faith. Job felt that silence. David cried in the Psalms, Why, Lord, do you stand far off? Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble? Psalm 10:1. Even Jesus, hanging on the cross, cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me? Matthew 27:46. But here's the twist. God had not abandoned him. That silence was the backdrop for the loudest declaration in history. It is finished. Do you see it? Silence doesn't mean defeat. Silence means God is aligning heaven and earth for the breakthrough that's coming. Let me take you. There was a man who had been praying for a job for months. Each interview ended with rejection. He begged God, why won't you answer me? But months later, when he finally received an offer, he discovered that the company he had been desperate to join earlier had collapsed financially. If God had answered too soon, it would have destroyed him. The silence wasn't cruelty, it was protection. C.S. Lewis explained it this way. We are not necessarily doubting that God will do the best for us. We are wondering how painful the best will turn out to be. Sometimes the silence is painful, but that pain doesn't mean God is absent. It means He is perfecting. And here's the anticipation. If silence is strategy, then your unanswered prayer may be proof that the best is yet to come. And here's the anticipation. If silence is strategy, then your unanswered prayer may be proof that the best is yet to come. Abraham prayed for a son and waited decades in silence before Isaac was born. Hannah cried out year after year before Samuel arrived. Zechariah and Elizabeth lived most of their lives childless before God gave them John the Baptist. Every one of these stories proves one thing. God's delays are not denials. His silence is not rejection. His timing is always redemption. So let me ask you, what if tonight's silence is setting the stage for tomorrow's miracle? What if the very thing you've been waiting for is closer than you think, but God is still aligning the pieces so that when it comes, you'll see His glory in full? That's why tonight, His message for you is this. Trust me in the silence. Trust me in the waiting. Trust me in the pit. Because I am shifting your story, even when you cannot see it. And maybe right now you need to respond. Not with another question, not with another why, but with surrender. If that's you, write this in the comments as your declaration of faith. I will trust you in the silence. Let the world see your faith. Let heaven see your surrender. Because remember this, Jesus didn't stay in the silence of the grave. 3 days later, resurrection shattered the stillness. The silence was not the end, it was the setup. And that same resurrection power is still alive in you tonight. Here's the final question I want you to wrestle with. If God's silence is the setup for resurrection, are you willing to wait in the tomb until His power shows up? Because if you are, then you're ready. You're finally ready. Let's close with this. Isaiah 40:31 says, "But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary, and they shall walk and not faint." Waiting is not wasting. Silence is not abandonment. And tonight, God's whisper to you is simple. Hold on. Trust me. The shift is already happening. So before you leave, I want you to pause and do something bold. Type it one last time in the comments. I'm ready for the shift. Speak it, declare it, believe it. Because the moment you surrender to God's timing, everything begins to change. And if this message touched your heart tonight, don't leave without sharing it. Someone you love is also sitting in the silence, and they need to know that God has not forgotten them. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to LWN, and hit the bell icon so you never miss the words God is speaking through this channel. Because I believe with all my heart, you're finally ready, and the best is yet to come.